Take that ring off before the man who owns it sees you." The warning sliced through the crowded ballroom, but Grace Bennett did not move. Under the cold white glow of crystal chandeliers, nearly 200 of Chicago's wealthiest guests turned to stare at the plus-size young woman standing beside a fallen tray of champagne glasses. Grace wore a simple black catering dress stretched across her soft curves, sensible shoes, and the exhausted expression of someone who had spent years apologizing for taking up space. At 28, she worked double shifts at Bellini Hall to pay her mother's medical bills, ignored the whispers of co-workers, and survived the cruel jokes of people who believed kindness was weakness. Tonight, however, nobody was staring at her size. They were staring at the heavy silver ring on her right hand, a ring engraved with a black wolf wrapped around a crown. Grace instinctively curled her fingers against her palm. She had worn it every day since an injured stranger pressed it into her hand 8 years earlier, moments before an ambulance carried him away. She had never learned his name. She only knew he had been bleeding in an alley during a January snowstorm, and she had stayed beside him when everyone else walked past. "I asked you a question," snapped Vanessa Cole, the glamorous event coordinator who had spent the evening criticizing Grace's dress, her posture, and the amount of room she occupied between tables. Vanessa stepped closer, her jeweled heels crunching over broken glass. "Where did a woman like you steal a Moretti family ring?" A nervous silence swallowed the room. Grace felt heat climb her neck, but she lifted her chin. "I didn't steal it." Vanessa laughed loudly enough for the nearby guests to join her. "Of course not. I suppose a billionaire handed it to you because he admired your personality." A few people smirked. Grace's fingers trembled, yet her voice remained steady. "Someone gave it to me because I helped him." "You expect us to believe that?" Vanessa reached for Grace's hand. Grace stepped back, bumping into a table. Champagne spilled across the white linen, and the laughter grew sharper. She had endured comments about her body since high school, endured a former fiancé who hid their engagement from his friends, endured employers who called her dependable while refusing to let her greet important clients. But the ring was different. It was the only proof that one act of courage in her life had mattered to someone. "Please, don't touch me," Grace said. Vanessa's smile hardened. "Security will touch you when they drag you outside." Across the ballroom, the private elevator doors opened. The laughter stopped before the man inside took his first step. Luca Moretti entered wearing a charcoal suit that fit his broad shoulders with military precision. At 36, he was the city's most feared mafia boss, a man whose wealth stretched from luxury hotels to shipping companies, and whose name could empty a room faster than a fire alarm. Criminals feared his patience more than another man's rage. Politicians avoided his stare. Even his allies measured every word around him. Luca had not smiled publicly in 11 years, not since betrayal inside his own family left his younger brother dead, and Luca convinced that trust was merely a weapon people used before striking. He moved through the ballroom with 2 silent guards behind him, his expression cold, controlled, and unreadable. Vanessa immediately straightened. "Mr. Moretti, I'm sorry for the disturbance. One of the servers stole something belonging to your family." Luca's dark eyes passed over the shattered glasses, the laughing guests, and finally Grace. She expected him to see what everyone else saw first, the catering uniform, the cheap shoes, the body strangers judged before learning her name. Instead, his gaze stopped on her clenched hand. "Show me," he said. His voice was quiet, but every person in the ballroom obeyed its weight. Grace swallowed. "I can explain. Open your hand." She slowly unfolded her fingers. The silver wolf caught the chandelier light. Luca froze. For the first time that night, something cracked through his controlled expression. Not anger, recognition. His guards exchanged startled looks. Vanessa rushed to fill the silence. "I knew she stole it. I can have her searched immediately." Luca raised one hand, and Vanessa stopped speaking. He walked toward Grace until only 3 feet separated them. She noticed a thin scar near his temple and another crossing the knuckle of his left hand. Then she saw his eyes change, as though he were no longer standing in a ballroom but lying in a snow-covered alley years ago, listening to a frightened young woman promise that he would not die alone. "What is your name?" he asked. "Grace Bennett." Luca looked at her face carefully, then at the ring again. His voice dropped so low only she could hear it. "You kept it." Grace's breath caught. Before she could answer, Luca turned toward the crowd, removed his coat and placed it gently over her shoulders. The gesture silenced even Vanessa. Then the deadliest man in Chicago looked at every person who had laughed and said, "The next person who disrespects Grace Bennett answers to me." But when Luca looked back at the ring, his expression darkened. Engraved inside the band was a fresh symbol Grace had never seen before, and it meant someone in that ballroom already knew exactly who she was. "Nobody leaves this ballroom." Luca Moretti's order fell with such quiet force that the musicians stopped playing before his guards even reached the doors. Grace stood beneath his charcoal coat, surrounded by broken glass and frightened strangers, while the warmth left Luca's face. He took her right hand carefully, not gripping it, only turning the silver ring toward the chandelier. Inside the band, beneath the original Moretti crest, someone had carved a tiny red-painted serpent. Grace had never noticed it. "What does it mean?" she asked. Luca released her hand at once, as if remembering that everyone was watching. "It means the person who marked this believed you would come here tonight." Vanessa Cole gave a nervous laugh. "That's impossible. She was assigned this event this morning." Luca's eyes shifted to her. "Who changed the assignment?" Vanessa's confident smile faltered. "The catering manager, I assume." "You run every detail in this building," Luca said. "You don't assume." He turned to his security chief, Marco De Luca. "Collect every phone. Check the cameras, employee records and service entrances. Anyone who refuses stays until the police arrive." Several wealthy guests protested at once. Luca looked toward them and the room became silent again. Grace had never seen power used without shouting. He did not threaten anyone. He simply spoke as though resistance had already been considered and dismissed. Vanessa pointed at Grace. "You're treating her like a guest when she may be involved." Luca stepped between them. "Her name is Grace Bennett. Use it." Vanessa's face reddened. "Mr. Moretti, surely you don't believe some waitress's story because she happens to be wearing an old ring." "She isn't a waitress tonight," Luca replied. "She is under my protection." The words sent a ripple through the ballroom. Grace felt every stare sharpen, but Luca did not touch her again. Instead, he moved half a step aside, leaving her room to breathe. "Would you come with me?" he asked. It was the first request anyone had heard him make all evening. Grace hesitated. Powerful men had offered her help before, usually expecting gratitude, obedience, or silence in return. Luca seemed to read the fear in her expression. "You may say no." That surprised her more than his threat to the room. She nodded once. He led her through a private corridor into a dim office overlooking the Chicago River. Snow pressed softly against the windows, mirroring the storm from 8 years earlier. Luca closed the door but remained several feet away. On the desk sat a framed photograph of 2 young men. Grace recognized one immediately, though the man in the picture had fewer scars and warmth in his eyes. "It was you," she whispered. Luca looked at the photograph. "I wondered whether you remembered. You were barely conscious. I remember your red scarf. I remember you taking off your gloves to stop the bleeding. I remember you telling me that dying would be rude after making you miss your bus." Grace almost smiled. "You were being difficult. I had been shot and betrayed by someone I trusted. Difficult was an improvement." His voice remained controlled, but his hand tightened near the scar across his knuckle. Grace noticed the second man in the photograph. "Your brother?" "Matteo. He died that night." The coldness in Luca's face no longer looked empty. It looked carefully built, brick by brick, around grief. "I gave you the ring because it was the only thing I had that could guarantee protection. Then you disappeared before my men found you. My mother was hospitalized the next morning. I left the city for 6 months." Grace lowered her eyes. "When I came back, I thought finding you might cause trouble. You saved my life and worried that you would inconvenience me." There was no mockery in his voice. People usually don't like being reminded of who they were at their weakest. Luca studied her for a moment. "You stayed when stronger people ran. That was not my weakest moment, Grace. It was the moment I learned courage does not always look the way arrogant people expect." Before she could answer, the office door opened and Marco entered, carrying a tablet. We found the assignment change. It came from an encrypted account registered under a dead employee's name. Luca's expression hardened. And the cameras? Someone erased 12 minutes of footage near the service entrance. Grace glanced through the glass wall toward the ballroom. A server was collecting untouched champagne flutes from the head table. Something about the tray made her stomach tighten. The glasses carried black napkins, except for one with a folded silver napkin positioned at Luca's seat. She remembered seeing Vanessa move that exact glass after the tray fell. "Luca," Grace said urgently, forgetting the distance between them. "Don't drink anything." He turned. Grace rushed to the door, but a young guard had already lifted the silver-marked glass to inspect it. "Put it down," she shouted. The guard froze. Marco seized the glass and smelled it, then dipped a testing strip into the champagne. The strip turned dark blue. Poison. Luca looked from the glass to Grace, his voice dangerously calm. "How did you know?" "Vanessa switched it before she accused me." Marco checked his tablet again, then went pale. "Boss, Vanessa Cole is gone." At that exact moment, Grace's phone vibrated inside her apron. A message from an unknown number appeared on the screen. "You saved him once. Do it again, or your mother will not survive the night. Your mother has 12 minutes before the medication reaches her bloodstream." Grace's knees nearly gave out, but Luca caught her elbow before she fell. He did not pull her against him or trap her in his grip. He steadied her, waited until she could stand, then looked at the message on her phone. The softness that had briefly appeared in his eyes disappeared. "Marco, call St. Catherine's Hospital. Lock down the 4th floor. Nobody enters or leaves without my authorization." Grace stared at him. "How do they know where she is?" Because this was never only about the ring. Luca handed the phone to Marco and turned to Grace. "Tell me everything about your mother's treatment." "She has heart failure. Her evening medication is delivered at 10. Grace checked the clock above the office door. 9:51 p.m. "Luca, I have to go. You will not reach the hospital in 9 minutes. Then get me there faster." The words came out sharper than she intended, but Luca did not react with anger. Instead, something like respect moved across his face. "Good," he said. "Stay angry. Fear makes people careless." He removed a small earpiece from Marco's jacket and placed it in Grace's palm. "You stay beside me and you do exactly what keeps you alive, not because I command you, but because whoever sent that message expects you to panic." Grace closed her fingers around the device. "And what do you expect?" "I expect you to notice what the rest of us missed." 3 minutes later, Luca led Grace through the ballroom, while his guards sealed every exit. The guests stood in frightened clusters beneath the chandeliers, their expensive clothes suddenly unable to protect them from suspicion. Vanessa was nowhere in sight. Marco projected the erased security footage onto a wall, but only static appeared between 9:28 and 9:40. Luca faced the room. Someone helped Vanessa Cole enter a restricted corridor, change Grace Bennett's assignment, poison my glass, and threaten a patient under hospital care. That person is still here. No one spoke. Grace looked from face to face. A city councilman avoided Luca's gaze. 2 businessmen whispered near the bar. The catering manager was crying beside the kitchen doors. Then Grace noticed a man in a white dinner jacket rubbing his thumb against a red stain on his cuff. It was the same shade as the serpent carved inside her ring. "Him," she said quietly. Luca followed her gaze. The man bolted toward the service hallway. Marco's guards moved, but Luca was faster. He blocked the doorway without drawing a weapon, and the man stopped so abruptly that he nearly slipped on the marble. "Name," Luca said. "Daniel Voss," the man answered, breathing hard. "I'm a guest. Guests do not wear industrial marking dye." Luca seized his wrist and turned the stained cuff toward the light. Grace stepped closer despite the fear tightening her chest. "He marked the ring? Or handled the tool that did?" Daniel laughed nervously. "You think I touched that cheap piece of silver?" Luca's eyes became dangerously still. "That ring belonged to my father." The room went silent. Daniel's smile vanished. Marco searched his pockets and found a hospital access card with the name of a retired nurse. Grace recognized the hospital logo. "Where is Vanessa?" she demanded. Daniel looked at her with open contempt. "You should have stayed invisible." Luca stepped between them before the insult could land fully. "Answer her." Daniel swallowed. Vanessa is not the one you should fear. His gaze shifted toward the photograph visible through the office glass. Ask Luca why the serpent was used by the men who killed his brother. Grace turned toward Luca. For the first time, his control cracked. The symbol belonged to the Serrano family, he said. They were destroyed 7 years ago. Daniel smiled. Not all of them. Grace's phone rang. The hospital's number appeared on the screen. She answered with shaking hands. Miss Bennett? A nurse whispered. Someone wearing a doctor's coat entered your mother's room, but your mother pulled the emergency alarm. Security arrived before he could inject anything. She is safe. Grace closed her eyes, relief breaking through her fear. Thank you. Then the nurse continued. There is something else. The man dropped a photograph. A picture arrived seconds later. It showed Grace at 17, standing outside a school beside a smiling woman she had always believed was her late aunt. Around the woman's neck hung a red serpent pendant. Luca looked at the image, then at Grace. Who is she? My mother's sister, Elena. She died when I was 18. Daniel began laughing again. No, she didn't. Luca's guards restrained him as he leaned toward Grace. Elena Serrano is alive, and she is the woman who ordered Luca Moretti's brother killed. Grace felt the room tilt around her. That's impossible. Is it? Daniel asked. Then why did she give you the ring marker? Why did she arrange your job tonight? And why has she been paying your mother's hospital bills for 6 months? Grace looked at Luca, expecting suspicion, anger, or the cold distance powerful men used when trust became inconvenient. Instead, he stood beside her while every eye in the ballroom judged her. She saved my life, Luca said. Until I see proof otherwise, nobody in this room will treat her as guilty. Daniel's smile widened. You want proof? He nodded toward the giant screen. The static disappeared, replaced by hidden camera footage from the service corridor. Vanessa stood beside a woman in a dark veil. When the woman turned toward the camera, Grace recognized the face she had mourned for 10 years. Elena looked directly into the lens and said, Bring Grace to me before midnight, or the Moretti Empire burns with her inside it. You are not going anywhere alone. Luca's voice was low, but Grace heard the fear hidden beneath the command. The ballroom clocked 10:07 p.m. Less than 2 hours remained before Elena's deadline, and every second seemed to tighten the air around them. Grace stared at the frozen image of the veiled woman on the screen. For 10 years, she had believed Elena Serrano was dead. She had carried flowers to an empty grave, comforted her mother through anniversaries, and blamed herself for not saying goodbye. Now the woman she had loved like family was threatening to destroy Luca's empire and everyone inside it. She asked for me, Grace said. That means I may be the only person who can stop this. Or the easiest way to trap me, Luca replied. Daniel Voss laughed from between Marco's guards. She understands faster than you do, Moretti. Luca turned his head slightly. Daniel stopped laughing. Take him downstairs, Luca ordered. Keep him alive. Grace stepped closer. If Elena wanted me dead, she had years to do it. She wants something else. Luca studied her face. And you think walking into her hands will reveal what? Why she paid my mother's bills, why she marked your ring, why she made sure I was here tonight. Grace looked toward the office photograph of Luca and Matteo, and why she killed your brother. Pain moved behind Luca's eyes, but he buried it quickly. Marco, trace the video source. Marco tapped across the tablet. Already working. The signal bounced through 3 locations, but the last relay came from an abandoned theatre on West Monroe. Grace's breath caught. The Rialto? Marco looked at her. You know it? Elena used to take me there when I was a child. She said empty theatres kept secrets better than churches. Luca's jaw tightened. Then she chose it for you. He ordered the ballroom evacuated in controlled groups, while his men searched every guest and vehicle. Vanessa's abandoned purse was found beneath the catering stairs, but inside it was not a weapon. It was a photograph of Grace's mother, taken that morning, with a handwritten note on the back. She lied to both of us. Grace's chest tightened. Luca noticed before she spoke. He removed the photograph from her trembling hand and turned it face down. You do not have to solve every betrayal tonight. I've spent my whole life believing I was the burden in my family, Grace whispered. What if I was the secret instead? Luca's expression softened. He guided her into the private office. away from the staring guests and flashing security lights. Snow drifted beyond the windows, pale against the black river. Grace wrapped his coat tighter around herself, but her hands would not stop shaking. Luca lowered himself in front of her until they were at eye level. The city's most feared Mafia boss knelt on the carpet without concern for who might see through the glass. "Look at me," he said. Grace did. "Whatever Elena did, whatever your mother hid, none of it changes what you chose 8 years ago. You found a wounded stranger and stayed. That was you." Tears filled Grace's eyes. "You don't know everything about me. Neither do you." His voice softened. "But I know enough not to let someone else's crimes become your shame." He wiped one tear from her cheek with his thumb, then immediately lowered his hand, giving her space to breathe. For one quiet moment, the danger outside the office seemed far away. Then Marco entered, carrying an evidence bag. "We found this sewn inside Vanessa's purse." Inside was a small brass key and a hospital birth record. Grace took the paper and read the name twice before understanding it. Infant, Grace Elena Serrano. Mother, Sofia Serrano. Father, Matteo Moretti. The room became silent. Grace looked from the document to the photograph on Luca's desk. Matteo's eyes were her eyes. The shape of his smile matched the one her mother said Grace inherited from nobody. "No," Grace whispered. "My father's name was Thomas Bennett." Marco shook his head. "There is no birth record under that name." Luca rose slowly, staring at the document as if it had opened an old wound. "Matteo told me he loved someone before he died. He never gave me her name." Grace could barely speak. "My mother?" "Sofia Serrano," Luca said, "Elena's younger sister." The truth struck with brutal clarity. Elena had not targeted Grace because she was random. Grace was both Serrano and Moretti, the surviving daughter of 2 enemy bloodlines. The family ring had recognized her before Luca did. A sudden explosion shook the ballroom windows. Guests screamed as the building lights vanished, plunging Bellini Hall into darkness. Emergency lights flickered red across the corridor. Marco's radio erupted with reports of smoke in the garage and armed intruders entering through the service level. Luca immediately moved in front of Grace. "Stay behind me." Her phone vibrated again. A live video appeared. Elena stood on the stage of the abandoned Rialto Theatre beside Vanessa, who was bound to a chair and crying. Behind them, rows of fuel canisters lined the curtains. Elena held up a second Moretti ring and smiled. "Now you know who you are, Grace. Come claim your place before 11 p.m., or I expose every Moretti account, every Serrano witness, and the truth your mother killed to hide." Grace looked at the clock, 10:16. Then Elena leaned closer to the camera and delivered the final blow. "And Luca, ask your loyal Marco why he was the last person seen with Matteo alive." "Marco, put the gun on the floor." Luca stood in front of Grace as red emergency lights pulsed through the smoke-filled corridor of Bellini Hall. The clock above the ballroom doors showed 10:18 p.m., leaving 42 minutes before Elena's deadline. Marco De Luca slowly removed his weapon and placed it on the marble. Around them, Luca's guards waited for a command, but none aimed at the man who had protected their boss for 11 years. "I was with Matteo that night," Marco admitted. Grace watched Luca's shoulders become rigid. "Why did you lie?" Luca asked. "Because your brother ordered me to." Marco pulled a sealed envelope from inside his jacket and held it out. Matteo discovered that Elena planned to unite the Serrano and Moretti families through Grace. When Sofia refused to surrender her daughter, Elena arranged the attack. Matteo knew someone inside your organization was helping her. He made me take Sofia and the baby out of Chicago while he stayed behind to draw Elena away. Luca did not accept the envelope. "You left him to die." Pain crossed Marco's face. "He made me choose between saving him and saving his daughter." Grace stepped around Luca before he could stop her. She took the envelope and opened it. Inside was a faded photograph of Matteo holding a newborn wrapped in a yellow blanket. On the back he had written one sentence: "Tell my daughter she was wanted before she was born." Grace covered her mouth as tears blurred the words. Luca looked at the photograph and years of anger seemed to collapse behind his eyes. "Why keep this from me?" "Because there was a traitor beside you," Marco replied. "Matteo believed revealing Grace would place her in danger. I watched her from a distance, but Elena found her first." A gunshot cracked from the service stairwell. Luca pulled Grace behind a stone column as his guards returned fire toward masked intruders below. "We settle this after she is safe," Luca told Marco. "Get us to the garage." "The main garage is burning," Marco said. "There is an armored car beneath the east loading dock." Grace wiped her eyes and folded Matteo's photograph into her apron. "We are going to the Rialto." Luca turned toward her. "No. Elena has Vanessa, evidence that could destroy your people, and answers about my mother. She expects me to arrive frightened and alone." Grace lifted her chin. "Let her believe she is getting what she wants." Luca stared at her for one tense second, then handed her a small tracking device. "You stay beside me until we enter. After that, you move only when you choose, not when Elena commands." They escaped through the kitchen as smoke rolled across the ceiling. Luca kept one hand near Grace's back without forcing her forward, shielding her from falling debris while Marco and 2 guards cleared the passage. At 10:32 p.m., the armored car stopped behind the abandoned Rialto Theatre. Snow covered the cracked marquee, and a single red light glowed above the entrance. Inside, Elena stood beneath the ruined stage curtains wearing a black suit and the serpent pendant Grace remembered from childhood. Vanessa remained tied to a chair near several fuel canisters, her makeup streaked with tears. "My beautiful niece," Elena said, "you finally know what they stole from you." Grace walked forward while Luca remained 3 steps behind her. "You stole my father from me." Elena's smile tightened. "Matteo chose weakness. He wanted peace when he could have ruled 2 families. He chose his child. He chose Sophia," Elena snapped. "Your mother hid you, changed your name, and spent years pretending poverty was protection. I paid her hospital bills because she threatened to reveal the accounts unless I helped." Grace's heart twisted, but she did not lower her gaze. "Why bring me here?" Elena held up the second Moretti ring. "Because your blood gives you a claim to both empires. At 11, Luca's council votes on his leadership. You will declare him responsible for Matteo's death, and the families will follow you." Luca's voice came from behind Grace, cold and controlled. "She is not your weapon." Elena lifted a remote control. A red timer illuminated beside the fuel canisters, 4-3s. "Then she becomes your funeral." Vanessa sobbed as Elena revealed a screen showing Luca's council gathered by video. "Speak, Grace. Tell them Luca murdered your father." Every face waited. Grace glanced at Luca. He gave no order, made no demand, and offered no promise. He simply stood beside her while his empire hung in the balance. Grace faced the camera. "My name is Grace Bennett," she said, "and Matteo Moretti was my father. Luca did not kill him. Elena Serrano did." Elena struck Grace across the face. Luca surged forward, but Grace raised one hand, stopping him. She reached into her apron and held Matteo's photograph toward the camera. Marco preserved his final statement, and Elena confessed while every council member listened. Elena's confidence vanished. Marco stepped from the balcony, revealing a transmitter clipped beneath the railing. The entire theatre has been broadcasting live. The council erupted on the screen. Elena pressed the remote, but nothing happened. Grace had quietly removed the battery when Elena struck her, using the moment Luca's coat slipped from her shoulders to hide the movement. "You taught me to sew," Grace said, opening her palm to reveal the battery. "You should have remembered I was good with my hands." Vanessa kicked a fuel canister toward Elena, knocking her off balance. A hidden gunman appeared above the stage and aimed at Grace. Luca saw him first and pushed her aside as the shot rang out. He fell to one knee, blood spreading across his shoulder. Grace caught him before he hit the floor. Elena seized a second remote from her pocket and smiled as the timer dropped below 10 seconds. "You can save him," she whispered, "or you can save everyone else." Grace pressed both hands against Luca's wound, then looked toward the stage curtain where the final wire disappeared. The woman everyone had underestimated suddenly understood that the bomb was not beneath the fuel at all. It was directly under Luca. "The bomb is beneath you." Grace's voice cut through the theatre as the timer flashed. Luca tried to rise, but blood darkened his shoulder and one knee buckled beneath him. Grace saw the thin wire running from the stage floor into the metal brace supporting the platform. She grabbed Luca beneath his uninjured arm and pulled with every ounce of strength she had. For years, people had treated her body as something to mock, hide, or apologize for. Now that same strength dragged the city's most feared man away from certain death. Marco fired at the lighting rig above them. The heavy frame crashed onto the bomb casing just as Grace and Luca rolled behind a stone pillar. The explosion tore through the center of the stage, sending splinters and smoke across the theater, but the fuel canisters remained untouched. Luca covered Grace with his body as debris rained around them. When the thunder faded, he lifted his head and touched her cheek. "Are you hurt?" he asked, even while blood ran down his own arm. "You were shot, and you're asking about me? Answer me. I'm safe." Relief crossed his face before pain pulled him back to one knee. Elena emerged through the smoke and seized Vanessa by the hair, pressing a broken piece of metal near her throat. "Nobody moves," she screamed. Her elegant control was gone. "Grace, come with me, or she dies." Vanessa looked at Grace with terrified eyes. Hours earlier, she had humiliated Grace before an entire ballroom. Now Grace saw not an enemy, but a frightened woman trapped by someone crueler than both of them. Grace stepped out from behind the pillar. Luca caught her wrist gently. "You do not owe Vanessa your life." "No," Grace said, meeting his eyes, "but I owe myself the chance to choose who I become." Luca released her immediately. He trusted her. Grace walked toward Elena while Marco circled through the dark balcony. "You wanted an heir to two families," Grace said, "but you never understood either one. Matteo chose love over power. My mother chose protection over pride. Luca chose truth over his empire. You are the only one who keeps choosing fear." Elena's hand trembled. "You know nothing about sacrifice. I know you made everyone else pay for yours." Vanessa suddenly drove her heel into Elena's foot and twisted free. Grace lunged forward, pulling Vanessa away as Marco reached the stage. Elena grabbed for the fallen remote, but Luca stepped between her and Grace despite his wound. "It is over," he said. Police sirens rose outside the theater. Every council member had witnessed Elena's confession, and Marco's broadcast had already delivered the evidence to federal investigators and trusted authorities. Elena looked at the exits, then at the ruined stage, finally realizing there was nowhere left to run. She was taken into custody along with Daniel Voss and the remaining conspirators. Vanessa admitted that Elena had blackmailed her with evidence of financial fraud, but she also accepted responsibility for helping lure Grace into danger. She apologized without excuses. Grace did not offer instant forgiveness, but she gave Vanessa something no one had given her in the ballroom, the dignity of being heard. Luca was taken to a private hospital before midnight. The bullet had passed cleanly through his shoulder, but Grace refused to leave until the doctor said he would recover. When Luca awoke near dawn, he found her asleep in a chair beside his bed, still wearing his charcoal coat. Snowlight filled the room. "Grace," he whispered. She opened her eyes and immediately stood. "How do you feel?" "Like a man who was dragged across a stage by someone much stronger than his enemies expected." Grace smiled through exhausted tears. "You scared me." Luca reached for her hand. "I have spent 11 years believing love only gives people a target. Last night, you proved it can also give them a reason to survive." Weeks later, Mafia Bennett finally told Grace the full truth. Matteo had loved them both and planned to leave the criminal world before Elena's betrayal destroyed that future. Mafia had hidden Grace not from shame, but from danger. Luca did not demand that Grace accept the Moretti name or claim any empire. He gave her the choice. Grace kept Bennett, the name of the mother who raised her, and wore the Moretti ring as a reminder that she belonged to no one's shadow. At a gathering in Bellini Hall, Luca stood before the same people who had laughed at her. He introduced her by name, not as his possession, not as a secret heir, but as the woman who saved his life twice and exposed the betrayal that had haunted both families. Then he took her hand in front of everyone. "You never had to become smaller to deserve respect," he said softly. "They simply had to become better people." Months later, Grace created a foundation for hospital patients and working families facing medical debt. Luca funded it quietly, but Grace led it on her own terms. Their love grew not from rescue, but from trust, courage, and the rare peace they found in each other. The deadliest Mafia boss in Chicago had frozen when he saw his family ring on a plus-size catering worker, but the ring was never the real reason he noticed her. He noticed the woman who stayed when others ran. who chose mercy when revenge was easier, and who carried strength the world had mistaken for weakness? Would you have trusted Luca after learning the truth? And could you have shown Elena the same courage Grace did? Share your answer in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories of danger, healing, and unexpected love.